Today we'll once again be joining the citizen hearing as they finish up their discussion on one of the most famous UFO cases in the world, known as the Roswell UFO incident. Thank you for joining me and welcome once again. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I hope everyone's had a great week, and before we start today's episode, I'd like to thank all of you for your support and generosity. And of course, if you haven't already, please consider following, sharing, and reviewing the podcast. This supports us by helping new listeners to find the show. And of course, you can also support us over at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or on buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. Or if you'd like me to share your paranormal encounter on the podcast, you can submit your story to me through email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And these links can be found in the show notes. And with all that in mind, now let's listen in on part 3 and the final chapter of the Roswell hearing.
Or if you prefer sitting is fine, and just repeat after me. I do hereby affirm
I do hereby affirm
that I will tell the truth
that I will tell the truth
and nothing but the truth
and nothing but the truth
to this committee today.
to this committee today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, I believe we're ready to begin.
We're reconvening the hearing, and we have a new witness, and we're going to start questioning from going this direction, taking testimony. Since we've heard testimony from the other individuals, I think we might open it up between a Q&A between the members and yourselves, because I think it generates focused information for the hearing. And not necessarily because we're so bright, but it's because the combination, the synergy of the two can be very effective. Colonel French, did we have testimony from you the other day, or is this the first time you have appeared?
No, this is my second appearance.
That's what I thought. I thought I remembered you, and I was impressed the last time. Colonel French, the floor is yours, and give us testimony.
I am Lieutenant Colonel Richard French, United States Air Force retired. I'm also a PhD. I was assigned to the 614th Tactical Fighter Squadron in Alexandria, Louisiana at England Air Force Base. I was sent to Alamogordo, New Mexico to accomplish my annual refresher course in the altitude chamber. While there, I learned of an accident a few miles away from Alamogordo, away from Alamogordo in the direction of the White Sands. A short time later, I witnessed the takeoff of a prototype of a fighter aircraft that I neither recognized or knew what it, had no idea what it was. Anyway, the aircraft took off at a very high rate of speed and fired a rocket. The rocket was basically 5 inches in diameter and about 6 feet long, about the same size as some of the modern anti-aircraft aerial rockets. I mean, air-to-air aerial rockets. Afterward, I was asked to review some of the items that were picked up from the crash site. There was an unknown number of humanoids either killed or injured. The parts of the casualties were taken to base operations at Holloman Air Force Base. The only parts of the craft that I was allowed to see had markings that appeared to be Arabic or some language I didn't understand. Later, I learned the parts and the casualties were transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and turned over to the Foreign Technology Division, under which is run by Colonel Paul Sleeper. Because I had left the Office of Special Investigations, I did not do any kind of formal report, and as I had been reassigned to the Pacific Air Forces at Tongneonchon, which is in Korea. So for that reason, I went out of the business. But I have quite an experience of seeing UFOs. The reason for that, very simply, is this: that when I was originally in the OSI, the very first of it, they're a very common appearance at a place called Gulf Breeze, Florida. I don't know if is that familiar to you, that location? The reason I say that is on virtually any evening, you can go out there and you'll see them come in and land or take off. We used to report that what they were swamp gas. But very frankly, it was one of those things of course it was a lie, but I was required to lie. And that concludes my statement.
Thank you. We'll proceed into, unless there's any of the others that want to give quick testimony, because we've already heard you once, we'll proceed to a Q&A and to a dialogue. Is there anybody that has something that's burning in their heart that they want to tell, or can we engage in a dialogue? Okay, we'll start with the congressman from Utah. Please.
Thank you.
10 minutes, Mr. Chair. We'll have 10 minutes.
We'll have 10 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's
That'll
not
take us
abuse
right-
it. Don't tell them 10 minutes. They just
We
tell
have
them they
8
got 8,
minutes.
they'll take 10.
That'll take us to 5 o'clock.
Colonel French, this is really something that you've just said here that's very important. It's highly significant, and I hadn't known until just I read this and listened to you just now exactly what you are saying. But so I'm going to ask you just some specific questions, and I want to start by saying I commend you for all the service you've given our country in uniform and for the things you've done that way. This is such a significant statement that I'm going to ask some rather specific questions, if that's all right. And that's, can you remember about when in the late 60s this event occurred? As close as you can. I mean, that's fine if it's just late 60s. If you know something a little more, I'd be most interested.
Sorry, I don't remember.
Well, about when was it that you said had to do with training in the late 60s that you were sent to Alamogordo?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, that's good enough. You learned of the accident a few miles away from Alamogordo. Now, when did you learn of that accident? I mean, was it right at the time of the accident, or was it later, or give me a little time frame here?
Well, it was
Speak
within...
close to the microphone,
If you
please.
get a little closer to the
Within a
microphone.
matter of hours. I mean,
Oh, the same day?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Because I would fix this to say the same day. That's significant. Okay, you witnessed the takeoff of the prototype to the fighter aircraft that actually engaged that unidentified
Yes.
object that was flying up there.
Yes.
And afterwards, you were asked to review some of the items. Now, this is the afterwards I'm really interested in. When afterwards were you asked to review some of the items that were picked up from the crash site?
Ones that I've been told about.
Oh, just a minute. Well, this statement, it says a short time later, I witnessed. No, excuse me. Afterwards, I was asked to review some of the items that were picked up from the crash site. There were an unknown number of humanoids, either killed or injured. Did you see those?
No, I didn't see them. I say that I was told about them.
Oh, okay, okay, now, and I understand that, and that's just fine. I just want to know exactly what happened here. The way this reads, I was wondering if you might have seen them yourself.
No.
You did not.
As I said, I've seen a lot of UFOs under other circumstances, but not at that time. No, that's doesn't apply.
Okay, you reviewed items, and what were the items that you reviewed that were picked up that made you believe, explain then how did you hear about the humanoids? Let me ask it that way.
I was told that that was what was found.
By who?
People that were there, yeah,
Air Force
there
people?
yeah, well, there were people that were enlisted people and various people that were there standing on the ramp.
Oh, that were picking up,
No, I don't know what they were doing, but I say that there were, needless to say, there was a lot of gossip and a lot of things going on,
Okay.
but that I was not a party to.
okay, so essentially you were told on that same day of the
Yes.
crash that there were unknown number of humanoids either killed or injured?
Yeah,
Okay. Did you see, or did somebody just tell you that the parts and
I
casualties were
un-
taken to base operations?
no, for instance, one of the people that I saw that I am certain would have seen it would happen to be a nurse that was in uniform. Was in uniform at the time.
Okay. She told you right then?
No, I say she would have known, but
Oh, I'm
she
sorry.
wouldn't talk to me.
Oh, okay. Well, you can only
I
find
had
out
to s- I had
something
to
if somebody
say-
either tells you
I
or
had a
shows you.
natural
or-
curiosity as to what was happening, but they were very closed-mouthed, very secretive about everything.
Okay, and you had learned that parts and casualties were transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Again, I'd be most interested to know where you learned that, or how you learned it, or the circumstances of learning it.
Well, later on, I had a very close friend who was a full colonel who Paul Sleeper was a very good friend of his. And he and I discussed that a little bit, and he said, yes, that's where the parts went. But he was full colonel, Dr. George Christoph.
Dr. George Christoph told you that
Yes.
at that same time, essentially? That same year, at least?
Well, it's later, but I don't remember exactly how much later.
Okay. Maybe after he had been through with his whatever non-disclosure he had to take care of. Okay, well, let me just turn back a little bit to Stanton Friedman and anybody that might want to answer any of these questions. What evidence do we have since 47, certainly in the 60s or at the time of this Alamogordo incident or anything, of what is the evidence that we have that's as solid as we have? What is the most solid evidence of the humanoid parts and so on that somebody told Colonel French about? Can we get to a direct person that might have said something either to Colonel French or anybody else about Alamogordo or anything that has to do with humanoids? Let's get into that. I want to know the best evidence there is out there today.
We've got lots of good
Not-
abduction stories.
Now, there might be things being withheld. That's not, and I understand all that. I just want to know, and that might be the fault of the Army, and that might be why we don't know. But I'm interested in what we absolutely do know about humanoids, even if,
Testimony from people who have been abducted is as close as you get. I mean,
well, who's saying that? Okay, well, give me the
there's
names.
a book out there, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO
Right.
Experience. It's about two people who were abducted. They were carefully investigated by Dr. Benjamin Simon, a psychiatrist who ran a hospital for 3,000 shell shock war veterans. He says the emotional upheaval in their voices as he had 10 sessions with each of them was as strong as that in any of the war veterans that he had dealt with PTSD. He's in the Army movie about PTSD. He knows that field, doesn't know flying saucers. And they were close, intimately close to humanoids, to occupants from a vehicle from up there.
Okay, Mr. Freeman, what are the names of those people that said they were abducted and then obviously came back to explain about that? What were their names?
Their names were Betty and Barney Hill, a couple in New Hampshire. The book is captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience by myself, and the woman who did most of the work was Kathleen Marden, who's Betty's niece. She has the hypnosis tapes. It's a long story, involved story, but one of the best ones around in terms of the quality of the people. Betty was a social worker.
Okay, and we can follow up and even read the book and so on. What other examples do we have?
Keeping with the Roswell theme, as we talked about the rancher Mac Brazel.
What year?
Yes, 1947.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
1947, time of the incident. When the rancher first reported the find to Sheriff George Wilcox.
And the rancher?
William W.W. Mac Brazel.
Okay.
Sheriff George Wilcox.
Okay, right.
And a reporter by the name of Frank Joyce from radio station KGFL placed a phone call to get some late-breaking news for his next report. And the sheriff said, "I think there's someone here you should speak with." And according to Joyce, he didn't get the name of the individual on the other line, but at first he was quite angry. He was upset about the fact, as described earlier, that he had to drive the sheep a couple miles around all this wreckage. Who was responsible? Who was going to come and clean it all up? I'm the supervisor and everything. And then he became more and more somber. And he started talking about, it was horrible, you wouldn't believe it. And Joyce finally, "What are you talking about? Something else?" To which he then would suggest, "Are you talking about bodies?" To which Joyce then suggested, "Well, you know they're launching those rockets over at White Sands. Maybe they've launched an animal. Maybe they're sending monkeys up in those rockets." To which Brazel fired back, "They weren't any monkeys, they weren't human."
They were human.
They weren't human.
Oh, they were not.
Weren't human.
Okay, want to make sure
Now,
I got that.
since then, Brazel's own granddaughter, Fawn Fritz, has described to us that she overheard her grandfather also make the remark about the poor, unfortunate creatures. We've also talked to young ranch boys at that time, Dee Proctor and Sidney Jack Wright, who were supposedly with Brazel when he would discover a couple of bodies a few miles from the debris field at another location. At Frankie Row.
And so that you're saying that they did talk about it right at that time?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's a little different than what you said.
Well, because it could take up a whole panel.
I've already gone over my time, but I'm
Well,
most interested.
I was just going to say, what you seemed to be asking me was, do we have any contemporaneous records from that time? Somebody wrote in their diary, "I saw bodies." If you want to talk about people who saw the bodies in 1947, yeah, we can give you lots of names.
And that's all I wanted is people that said it at the time, and nobody questions they said it at the time. And you had said, "Well, we've got them saying it later," and I just wanted to clarify this.
Is it clarified?
Because because as I pointed out, Major Marcel, the father of Colonel Marcel, said it at the time, and it became well known at the time. That's what I'm looking for, something that was said at the time on a humanoid or some kind of a life form or something associated with one of these sightings.
Could I take a minute?
Please. Well,
Okay.
it's up to the
No, you can take a
chair.
minute.
Thank you. We had mentioned Frankie Rowe. Her father was a firefighter with the Roswell Fire Department. His name was Dan Dwyer. And the fire department adjoined the courthouse at that time. There was one phone line that ran into both. You couldn't report an incident to one without both hearing about it. So there was the report of a crash north of town. There was a talk about something that had gone down north of town. and the fire department investigated it. They went to check it out. According to Frankie Rowe, who is still alive, that when her father returned, the military already was securing the site, but that he described that they had seen the bodies. And it was later, whether it was that evening or shortly thereafter, they were visited by the military, by a military officer and a number of other MPs. And they were very sternly warned about not talking about this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to hear from, again, any one of you that want to talk about this. What are the things that you were, I'd like to know what you wanted to say in this panel that you didn't say on the first panel. So, Mr. Colonel Marcel, do you want to talk about anything that you want to talk about that you didn't talk about on the first panel?
Well, I just have formed a lot of opinions about UFOs and extraterrestrial visitations, and what I'd like to emphasize is the fact that the universe is such a large place. There's 10 to 22nd power stars, which is about the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on Earth, just to say that if they represent all the stars, they're all the grains of sand on the beach. If you only say that one has life around it like us, and the rest of them are devoid of life, then I think we're sadly mistaken. Because the enormous possibilities of all life is everywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Colonel Randall, anything you want to add that you didn't say earlier?
One of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about, which I think diverges a tad bit, is this Project Mogul nonsense. And the
Okay.
Air Force explanation that Project Mogul explains it all, that Project Mogul was highly classified, and that's why the officers at Roswell were unable to identify the wreckage when they saw it. But it turns out Project Mogul was, although it was highly classified, the purpose, the equipment and the experiments being carried out in New Mexico was not classified. They were mentioned in the newspaper on July 10th as an explanation for what was found at Roswell. Charles Moore, who was one of the scientists on Project Mogul, had said that it was so highly classified they didn't even know the name. Yet if you review Dr. Crary's diary from 1947, what you see is the name Mogul appearing periodically in it. The Air Force has used this as the cover. They said originally in 1947 it was a weather balloon. Then they said, well, we lied about that. It wasn't a weather balloon. And then they gave us another one, another weather balloon as an explanation. And that seems to have set in now after the last 10 years with the media that, well, Roswell's explained as a weather balloon. And the answer is they can't even point to a flight of these balloons that have not been identified as such. So the Project Mogul explanation simply doesn't work. We looked at, and I say we, Don and Stan and I have looked for alternative explanations for the Roswell case. We went to White Sands Missile Range to see if there was a missile launch that would account for the debris found on the Brazel Ranch. We went to the archives in Alamogordo on the space program to see if they were launching any kind of creatures, whether they were mice or mayflies or chimpanzees, that would account for the wreckage, and we could find absolutely nothing. I had always said if we could find an explanation for this, maybe they had tested an astronaut in 1947 and he was killed in the test, and if we could find something like that, we could write a best-selling books about it and make a lot of money. But we could find nothing that explains the Roswell wreckage. When you account for all the testimony, all the people who were involved, what they told us, the limited documentation we have, but when you look at all of that together, none of the explanations offered explains it in terrestrial terms.
Yes, Mr. Friedman.
Another point that should be made is that I contacted somebody who looked at the newspaper in Alamogordo, which is right next to Holloman Air Force Base. And it turns out they staged the launch of a radar reflector weather balloon combination.
On July 10th.
The newspaper, July 10th.
Yes.
And Fantasy of Flying Disc Explained Here was the headline. And they showed a picture of one of these balloon trains. And it just doesn't fit. If you look at the facts about what they launched and what was observed, they don't match. They don't match at all. But the fact that they went to the trouble of staging a launch tells you something was very important. Why bother? You know, if it's just a dumb old weather balloon, who cares?
Right.
It makes no sense. So they went to a lot of trouble to try to cover it up. And when Cavett, the CIC man, comes up with this real crazy story that he knew was a balloon right away, it only covered an area 20 feet in diameter, even though the newspaper said 200, mind you, fit in one car, nothing to it. If that's all there had been, the rancher would have brought in his wreckage in his little truck.
Right.
There would have been no reason for Jesse Marcel and Captain Cavett to follow him all the way out in the middle of nowhere. There's a lot of nowhere in New Mexico.
Right, which is,
And they stayed overnight, had their sleeping bags. That's making a big deal about nothing when Cavett lies and says it would fit in one vehicle, 20 feet square. But the New York Times didn't comment about it. Everybody carried that explanation. So one of the things we're dealing with here is a failure of the press to ask even the obvious questions. You know, the colonel, the head of the 509th can't identify a weather balloon? These guys had fought in the Pacific. They weren't right off the training base. Jesse Marcel couldn't identify a weather balloon? They got away with it. And so, but this is in the 90s, mind you. So the press is still not doing this job. I can understand in 47. We just fought a great war. You know, you believe the government. Didn't everybody believe the government back then? But in 97, that they could get away with this, it really bugs me. And a little inside story. I'm waiting. They have reissued, Cosimo Publishers has reissued those 2 volumes of the Roswell report. The second one was case closed. The first one said they were not going to say anything more. 3 years later, this is the second one. On the top, it says, with the new introduction by nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, author of Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. I'm waiting for somebody in the Air Force, because my comments are very strong about lies by the Air Force about in this report. I'm waiting for somebody to say, hey, look what he said about us. If I don't make it home, you'll know why.
Donald?
In keeping, as far as even on the CIC, on the Sheridan Cavett theme, as Kevin remembers the numerous times that we actually sat down and met with then Lieutenant Colonel Sheridan Cavett, he and his wife Mary, whether in their home up in Sequim, Washington, or their winter home in Sierra Vista.
Promoted to Lieutenant Colonel?
Yes.
No,
Yeah, he retired Lieutenant Colonel. And the very first meeting, how we spent the better part of an afternoon, his denying he was even there, that he had yet to even arrive at Roswell. Didn't matter. You're talking about someone else, someone who was there before me. And as we were leaving, he walked us out to the car. And he says to us, boys, I need to know one thing. Should you find anything that should threaten national security, you will keep it to yourselves, won't you? And we looked at one another and, well, yes, Colonel, of course, of course. And we got in the car and we looked at one another and said, he knows, he knows. And then as we would visit and press more and more, and we'd speak with him over the phone and demonstrate not only was he there, but he was involved. And to the point that, well, I went out there, but it wasn't really anything. Well, at one point he even said, well, it could have been a flying saucer, but I wasn't involved, that type of thing. The very last time we met with him, and he and his wife were outside at the car. And I said to him, Colonel, I really have to hand it to you. You've been a man who's kept your oath all these years. You're a true patriot. And he thanked me, and I said, but Colonel, what gives you the right withholding it from my generation? All of us who weren't even there in 1947. You've decided for all of us. And he paused for a moment, he says, I've never thought of it that way before. but I'm still not going to tell you anything. And then his wife, Mary, blurts out, tell the boys about the colonel from the Pentagon who was just here to talk with you. And he turns and gives her this look, this searing look. And it was Colonel Richard Weaver in preparation of the Project Mogul report, to which Colonel Cabot become their lone star witness. And he snaps at us, and yes, and I told him exactly what I'm telling you. I wasn't involved. Well, that's not what's in the Project Mogul report. According to what he told Colonel Weaver, he was the one who immediately identified it as nothing more than this mogul balloon. And in fact, he kept it to himself. He didn't even bother telling the base commander or Major Marcel, but that he saw that it was nothing more than a weather balloon. So we caught him in a flat lie. He nonetheless is the only witness to this being a mogul balloon. But as he told us, as he said, as I told Colonel Weaver, I wasn't involved. So who should we believe?
And in fact, we have Colonel Cabot on tape. It was right after Weaver had seen him, and he was talking about how he wasn't there. We said, well, they talk about this West Texas boy who was a good horseman, and Cabot says, well, that sounds like me, but I wasn't there. And then this was after Weaver had interviewed him. We look at the testimony in the report, and Cabot says, well, I noticed it was a weather balloon immediately. The next question should have been, did you communicate this rather vital piece of intelligence to Jesse Marcel? But they go off on another tangent. Cabot made it clear that the CIC was a Class 2 facility on Roswell, which means he did not report to Blanchard in the chain of command. Blanchard was required to support his activity. But he should have said something to Blanchard before he sends people out to clean the mess up, and before he issues a press release and says, well, we've got a flying saucer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Before we continue, we're going to take a quick break, so please stay tuned.
Well, our next person to question is Carolyn Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I voted Mr. Schmidt. Could you give me 4 sound scientific reasons why we ought to look further into Roswell, or why Roswell is important to what we're discussing this week?
Very good. As I remarked in my opening statement, we're here representing the memories of so many of the hundreds of witnesses that we have interviewed through the years. We remain in contact with the families as they continue to encourage us to not only pursue a final solution to what their parents so often died with, or would confide finally to having truth without proof. It was one of the problems, as we depicted even in the Roswell movie, that you can swear on a stack of Bibles that this happened, but without the physical proof, just as none of us, we can't prove this. So what we're asking, or what we're certainly asking as far as your counsel, on behalf of those now deceased witnesses, as well as their surviving families, what type of effort on our part, or how would you advise us to even continue the work of the late Congressman Stephen Schiff in pushing for a disclosure of the file, an opening of the Roswell file once and for all? We don't want to see Project Mogul. We know all about Project Mogul, and it does not address the eyewitness testimony. The wooden crash dummies wasn't even that same year. It was 5 years removed. We're talking about sworn affidavits, deathbed declarations, and the support of the families who would at least like to know that their spouses, their husbands, their fathers didn't live a lie. didn't persist in maintaining that this was something extraordinary, this was something beyond any earthly comprehension. The fact that, as I keep hearkening back to your own esteemed colleague, Congressman Schiff, he obviously saw that he was being stonewalled, that there was much more to this.
Okay, stop. Give me 3 or 4 specific scientific realities that we know happened at Roswell, in Roswell.
It's an historic fact that the United States Army Air Corps announced on July 8th that they had captured a flying saucer. That's not scientific, it's historic.
And they acknowledge that Mr. Marcel's father saw particles.
Yes,
Some people saw it crash.
yes.
And did you just say the military or our government acknowledged that a flying saucer or something crashed?
They put out a press release
Okay,
that they had
that's a good
actually
one.
captured a flying disc, correct.
Okay, that's one.
2 would be the fact that for years thereafter, no matter what the second solution to the recovery, the weather balloon, eyewitnesses were still discussing this with their families, still saying that the flying saucer was the correct explanation, even to their deathbeds. The third would be the deathbed testimonies, admissible in a court of law.
And what did 1 or 2 of them allude to or testify to or say?
As I stated earlier,
That they saw it, they saw it crashed?
They would talk about either guarding, shipping,
Okay.
crating up, flying out, the remains, the wreckage, handling of the wreckage,
Okay.
seeing the bodies.
All that needs to be on the record. That's why I want you to be specific, and you're doing well. One more, sir? Any one other thing, if there is one. If there's not, that's okay.
Fourth would certainly be flight records, for example. Records as far as outgoing cryptology records from the base. This was one of the things that even Congressman Schiff was pushing for through the General Accounting Office for all the records concerning the event. And the GAO, their information received from all branches of the military, specifically the Air Force, was that all the records of the base at Roswell in the summer of 1947 had been mysteriously destroyed.
Okay.
Now, we don't believe that for a second.
No, they're classified. They're over there somewhere. Okay.
That's right.
I don't want to lose what we have. Our responsibility is
So
here.
those records exist, and we would also ask that,
Okay.
again, if
Well,
they
can
were to
I
disclose
ask on
anything
behalf
else.
of this panel, and others probably too, and you just identified 3 or 4 things just off the top. There might be 10. That would give us something in writing, a page or 2, with listing those, so that we wouldn't have to dig them up. It would help us in our deliberations or whatever recommendation we would make. If the experts can provide, particularly this on Roswell and some of the other things that we heard last 3 days, and I'm sure the next 2, that would help us make intelligent decisions on what we might get together and try to agree on and try to recommend if we can come to such a point. That would be helpful.
Let me just,
I should, oh,
but just, we did mention that during the break, that we should have provided you with a timeline, a breakdown, a principal but
It's not too late, though. It's not
the
too
fact
late.
that if we combine as far as Stan's efforts and our own, we're talking a combination of, we're approaching 100 years of research in
Right,
this.
I understand.
And it has become so complicated, so involved, that to just provide even a briefing paper, we would be happy to do
Okay,
that.
and what I'm suggesting is not you all have the briefing paper and we'll brief who we want to share this information with. We don't have to have it quite finite like that. We do have to have it in a statement of 2 or 3 sentences that we would understand that we can teach and mobilize and educate others so that we know what we're talking about, and then we would bring you guys in to actually give it to them and give them the detailed information. That's not to mention that you probably shouldn't have some, if it's this important, and I think that it is in terms of what we're here for this week, there ought to be something, a document, something that all you all can come behind and all the research that you've done. You know, something, you know how you're in college and get these primers? It doesn't have to be a big volume. You've got them in a lot of volumes already, just pulling it together. Because of all the work that members of the House and Senate do in this town, It's going to be something like that. It's not going to be a big volume that gets the attention. It's what you say, how you say it, and how concise you can do it. If you'll do that, that'll help us do whatever we're going to finally end up doing and presenting.
I forgot that the panel wasn't at my lecture last night, where I went into some.
Too late. We start at 6 in the morning. We don't do that.
You're right.
I mean, we really do. And we go from 6 in the morning, contrary to what the newspaper says about all of us. We work very hard. From 6 in the morning to 10 or 11 at night. But I mean, it's all nonstop. But we're very sorry that we couldn't get in. We probably won't be at the ones this evening. But that's not to say that we aren't interested in what you do and what you say.
And we have
good
prepared
question.
briefing documents in the past when we have responded to the Air Force, for example, regarding Project Mogul. And we would have press conferences, and we would have briefing documents to present as far as to the media.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I yield back, sir.
Thank you very much. Congressman,
I-
Congresswoman Lynn Wilson.
He knows my name, thank you. Somewhere in today's testimonies in the papers, and was it Major Marcel that was put into, put in a house where he was held kind of hostage?
Mac Brazel.
Oh, that was
The rancher.
Brazel.
Rancher.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. Oh, what was that about, and how did he get through that?
What happened is Brazel came in, of course, on a Sunday and announced that he had this debris. He then led Marcel and Cabot back out to the ranch. They brought the material back to Roswell. He stayed at the ranch. Now, a couple of days later, the radio station owner of KGFL brought Brazel back into town so that they could interview him. They recorded an hour-long interview with him. Before they could air that, they got, and we have this testimony on both audio and videotape from Judd Roberts, who was a minority station owner of KGFL, that they were told by their congressional representatives that if they aired that report, they better start looking for another job because they wouldn't be in the radio business anymore. Walt Whitmore, who was the majority owner, took Brazel out to the base. So that's how he got out to the base. They then kept him out there for a number of days. They took him into Roswell to the newspaper, and he made the statement that appeared on July 9th about the harassed rancher who found the whole thing. And according to what Brazel said to neighbors, Marion Strickland, the Proctors, and people like this, he was held there for a number of days and was not allowed to leave, so that the military had him in custody. Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal, was the one who told me that he was held in the guest house as opposed to another facility on the base. So he was held there for a number of days. His son, Bill Brazel, read about his father in the newspaper, went to the ranch. His father wasn't there. He came back a number of days. So the best estimate is he was held in Roswell for 4 to 6 days after he had returned.
And is that when he stopped talking?
He was told, I always got the impression from talking to Bill Brazel that they merely said to him, well, we would rather you kept this quiet. And Bill said to us, and my father was such a man that if you asked him to do something like that and he gave his word, then that was good enough and he wasn't going to talk about it. So he shared very little with his family about what had happened to him or the neighbors, but he was really annoyed about being held in Roswell for a number of days, and that is what he talked about to the neighbors, and we have a great deal of testimony from those who heard him talking about it.
So you're talking about a civilian who is
Right.
essentially arrested, detained by the
Abducted.
military
Yeah.
for 5 to 6 days.
Right, right.
He was not afforded due process.
No.
He, your typical 2 phone calls. He was not even allowed to call his own wife to tell her where he was and that he was okay.
Yeah,
He
no.
described how he was kept up all hours of the night, and he was asked the same questions over and over again. So it still comes back to what information, what did he see that was so sensitive that the military saw it in their best interest to keep him under lock and key until they gained his cooperation, and then were assured in their releasing him that he would not say anything further about this. As his son Bill would say to us, it's better you don't know. Don't ask, it's better you don't know.
Okay, I really don't have anything else, so thank you.
Very much. Congressman
Again, thank you all very much for your testimony. These were not animal remains in that rocket. I can say that with some confidence because I was involved in the first suborbital primate flight in Pensacola, Florida, and I went there in 1959, so it was about 1960 that we did the first suborbital primate flight, early in our space venture. Was there a mogul launch that could have been responsible for this?
The evidence that has been presented, and it was Dr. Albert Crary's diary who gave us the information. The identified flight was supposedly flight number 4 on June 4th, 1947. According to Crary's diary, because of cloud cover, the missile launch had been canceled, so their flight was canceled. Charles Moore, who was a scientist, told me when that happened, they stripped the equipment from the balloons, or from the arrays, but they couldn't let the helium out of the balloons, so they would let the balloons go. Crary's diary then has a cryptic note about on the same day that we flew Sonoboy up there and couldn't get good reception. So there's some discussion about it. The first recorded flight for Project Mogul was flight number 5. There had been 3 flights in New Jersey prior to them getting to New Mexico. So the documentation is a little bit hinky on that. But according to what Charles Moore had said in a letter that he wrote in 1995, that they didn't file the NOTAM as they were required by the CAA at the time. And I'm sure he did this because we went through the archives. I went to the archives looking for the NOTAMs because I'd like to see how they described the arrays and if there was a NOTAM for the June 4th launch. He said in a 1995 letter that they had not contacted the FAA because they didn't expect this mythical flight to get off the restricted area at White Sands. So even if the flight was launched, it wasn't expected to reach any altitudes, and it wasn't suspected to get off the White Sands missile range, according to him. And I'm sure that he said that simply because that would explain why there was no FAA notification. There is no good documentation that flight number 4 ever was launched. There was no good documentation that it reached the Brazil Ranch. There was no good documentation that Brazil was unable to identify the weather balloons. The Mogul arrays were just weather balloons, regular weather balloons. It was 15, 20 weather balloons strung together, but it's still weather balloons. Jesse Marcel would have recognized the weather balloons for what they were. Cabot obviously recognized the weather balloons, but the point is simply that had it been a Project Mogul flight, we would have been able to identify it specifically from the testimonies of the witnesses and the documentation available.
Why would they need a several-day cleanup if it was a Mogul balloon?
They wouldn't have if it had been a Mogul.
Was there, in fact, is that well documented, there was a several-day cleanup with a number of military people?
According to the witnesses, the people who were on the debris field cleaning it up, the men who were there that we were able to interview prior to their deaths, some of them on audio tape, some of them on videotape, they spent several days cleaning up the debris on the Brazil Ranch site, yes.
Okay.
You know, before my dad died, I asked him, would any of the debris still be out there? And he said, no, they vacuumed the place up. That was his words. They vacuumed it up.
Okay, really thorough cleanup. Why do we assume that other intelligent life has to look something like us?
We don't.
Isn't that a little arrogant?
We don't.
We don't? You're talking about
go with the
humanoids.
flow.
You're talking about humanoids.
That's what people see. You go with the flow.
Yeah.
The data says they're 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a body.
Okay.
The guys with 3 arms and 3 legs go to Jupiter,
Yeah.
for their vacation.
Yeah, it's just...
On the other hand, it may be that we are somebody's colony, that they seated us here, a penal colony.
I'm sure that there
girls here.
I'm sure there are some debunkers who have suggested that if we're seeing humanoids, we're hallucinating because it's perfectly conceivable that other intelligent life could have a different form than we have.
But not necessarily. As Dr. Michael Swords, Professor Emeritus at the University of Michigan, Kalamazoo, he's Professor of Natural History, Biologist, has suggested, if we consider biological symmetry, that throughout the universe that there would be a common link. that there would potentially be a resemblance, that they would be humanoid.
That's conceivable. That's
That's what
conceivable.
the evidence shows. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean there's
Okay.
nobody else out there, non-humanoid. Doesn't mean that.
In fact, if you take a look at all of the history of UFO sightings when they've reported occupants or creatures from inside, historically, most of them have been humanoid. There are some cases where one of them was described as a hairy jelly bean bag, things like that. But the testimony from the people who've seen creatures from inside the craft normally report a humanoid, maybe taller than us, maybe shorter than us, maybe much more robust, but it's usually a humanoid creature. There are some cases where they're robotic in nature, and in Pascagoula, the fellows there described something that really wasn't much in the way of a humanoid, but resembled vaguely a human.
I knew Steve Schiff, by the way. I was on the committee. I was there when we had that. I thought it was a hearing. I'm told now that it wasn't a hearing, that it was a briefing. But sometimes it's hard to tell briefings from hearings in your memory. Yeah, I know that he was concerned about this and was pushing to learn something. I mentioned before that there were two reasons that. Two things you could cite that tells you that the Air Force is not being truthful. There are really three. The press release they made, the fact that they sent these people these findings to Wright-Patterson, and the third thing is they were cleaning it up. If it was a weather balloon, none of those things would have happened. Well, the first one, there might have been some confusion, wild confusion, the first one, but the second two, never sent anything to Wright-Patterson, and they never would have cleaned up anything. It had been a weather balloon. When challenged, how do they explain that?
That our witnesses are all lying.
That's the only explanation.
That's the only explanation.
That nothing was ever sent to Wright-Patterson and nothing was ever cleaned up?
There's the FBI telex from the FBI Bureau in Dallas, Texas, that went out the very evening, 6:17 p.m., that the weather balloon explanation had just come out from General Ramey's press conference. And it refuted that. Ramey had canceled the continuing flight onto Wright Field. And that stated that based on their telephonic conversation between Wright Field and their FBI office, that this belief was not borne out. In other words, the balloon explanation was not what they've been talking about. It's not what they were hearing.
When did they switch from the weather balloon to mogul?
In 1994.
Ooh, quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
But that was mainly due to, again, Congressman Schiff pushing for release of the files.
They had to find something that was so highly classified they'd explain why they went to these Herculean efforts, and that was where the mythology grew that mogul was so highly classified. Yes, the explanation was classified, but all the experiments going on in New Mexico simply were not.
The purpose was classified.
Yep. But they were
not
using
the
common weather
equipment.
balloons, I understand?
Not the material.
Standard weather balloons at
Off the shelf.
20-foot intervals by string.
So the only thing
Typically
classified
20.
was that they had some additional instrumentation on it for picking up this radiation stuff.
No.
No, not at all. Everything on the mogul arrays launched in New Mexico was off-the-shelf materials. There were weather balloons. There were what they called a Raywin radar
Was the
target.
program that was classified?
Yes.
The purpose.
The purpose was
The
classified.
objective.
I got you. Objective classified, okay.
But they said that it was so highly classified, the people in New Mexico didn't even know the names yet. When you look at Albert Crary's diary, he uses the name mogul in there at least twice. So he's well aware of what the name was. So it's an ongoing thing that they've done and been bought into by an awful lot of the press. Well, it was explained as Project Mogul. It simply does not work.
Now, the project was so effective as it was designed to determine, as far as from high altitude, should the Soviets detonate their first atomic bomb, we would pick up a shock wave from this acoustic listening device, this microphone. That when they did first detonate an atomic bomb in August of 1949, it wasn't Mogul that picked it up. Mogul failed. We picked it up as far as due to chatter, talk, air sampling as far as higher radiation levels.
Yeah, by and by they get here.
So
The winds go around. Yeah. Why would it surprise anybody that we were trying to determine whether the Soviets were detonating a weapon? Why would that surprise people? Why should that be class? I was in the Congress for 20 years. I was on the Armed Services Committee for 20 years. I sat in a very large number of briefings. Classified briefings. I can tell you that I cannot remember a single thing that I was told that I think would give aid and comfort to the enemy. We classify way too much. There's an old axiom that says what's everybody's business is nobody's business. When you classify everything, nothing is classified. And we're pretty darn close to that.
Well, I think in 1947, the thought process was that we didn't want the Soviets to know that we had the capability to spy on them to do that. So that would
But the fact that we were sending something up there to listen wouldn't mean we had a capability. It was
And pretty sophisticated when you think about it just being a balloon with a kite.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all very much. Well, we're 60% of the way through. This has been a very productive first 3 days. Thank you all very much.
I have three. I've got 3 brief points to make. One, is there any speculation out there why the UFO crashed? Have you heard anything?
There's a lot of speculation.
Share one with us.
That it ran into a radar beam. That sounds a little strange, but we know that there was a launch scheduled for White Sands. And we know that those were vacuum tube radars, so they were left on so they wouldn't have to warm up. They were not transistorized or anything like that. So if a pilot and a wingman, 40% of the cases involve more than one object seen at a time. If they just happen to cross this beam, this wasn't searching this way, just a beam aiming out there, maybe killing a pigeon or something. You run into the beam and it discombobulates your guidance system, your propulsion system. Maybe they go like this, the 2 pilot and wingman kind of thing. And so that sounds dumb, not sophisticated, if you will, but you have to expect surprises. It's like drive through New Mexico and run into a hailstorm and I got bumps all over my car. New Mexico, it's dry. What kind of hailstorm? It was a big hailstorm. There's another point here too. General Groves, Manhattan Project Groves, as late as 48 was saying it would take the Russians 8 years before they could build an atomic bomb because they just don't have the industrial capacity that we do. Took one. There was an attitude in Washington. This is a bunch of dumb peasants, not sophisticated. Oh, maybe they got spies here and there, but nothing to it. And so this really shook them up. And also they said, even if they got a bomb, they had no means for delivering it. Casually forgetting that we'd left a B-29 that they then copied and built a bunch of and shocked us when they displayed them in Moscow at their usual dog and pony show. So the atomic bomb end of things was of great concern in the United States because there was real concern that once we found out, and one of the scariest memos I've ever seen from all the archive research is a National Security Council memo in the early 1950 saying the Russians have made more progress in the past 18 months in the development of nuclear weapons and methods for delivering them that had been expected for 5 years. They were concerned. Wouldn't you be under those conditions?
Very much so, very much
If
so.
I might speculate, you wanted speculation, and here's my favorite speculation. They did it on purpose. They crashed on purpose. What they wanted the most non-hostile way of announcing their presence to the earth, and what is more, would make us feel easier if we picked up the craft and the bodies and realized that they are as delicate as we are, as fragile as we are. They're non-confrontational. Now we have the information. Their plan failed simply because they crashed at Roswell and the embargo on the news went down. But I've always liked that theory. I don't subscribe to it, you understand, but I've always liked that theory that they did it on purpose.
That's interesting. Please.
These might have been clones that were expendable.
That's more of an American approach. Let me point out, earlier, I can't identify which one of you suggested it, but I think it was more than once. What should you do now after the hearings? We've got 2 more days of hearings, and I want to stress that tomorrow we're hearing testimony from people from South America, and that's in the morning, and in the afternoon we're hearing from people from the rest of the world who've stepped forward to testify. So this is very important. Up till now, it's been pretty much homegrown American approach, and I think it's much more significant from a world point of view. So you're asking what effort? Again, I think I've alluded to this earlier, but what the Congress, I think, is a dead letter to accomplish anything in that regard. And I say this with all due respect to the Congress, who have a lot of fine people. But I think that the best effort we have for bringing visibility to the people of the world of this issue. You're probably not all that familiar with the various conferences that the UN have. Remember, they had the conference on the child, the conference on women. They garner unbelievable attention and the build-up for these conferences. So I would ask that you use your good offices, and certainly we may try to approach this, that we could go to the United Nations. Now, I don't think we'd have a prayer in the Security Council because it's controlled by us, and that just wouldn't happen. But what would happen in the General Assembly if we were to introduce a resolution? Or if we can't do it as Americans, we could do it maybe through the Brazilian government or the Canadian government. They would introduce a resolution in the General Assembly. I'll bet you it would pass. They would fund some part of it. The rest of the funding could come from private sources. And we would have the most awe-inspiring world event on this subject within a couple, 3 years. And so I would ask you, I would suggest that you use your good offices to work with us as individuals or as a group to try to bring this about. And we're not prejudging anything, we're just feeling that this issue addresses the entire civilization of what we are on this planet. Let me thank everybody for today's participation. Obviously, later in the day, the number of people diminish, but let me emphasize, tomorrow is a very, very significant day for a hearing because we are broadening out as Americans to a global identification. So again, these hearings are adjourned.
I hope you all enjoyed this edition of the Roswell hearings, and if you'd like to learn more about the citizen hearing on UFO disclosure, please visit the show notes. And if you've had a paranormal experience and would like to share your story, you can contact me through email, voice message, or on our website, and these links can be found in the show notes as well. Until next time, I hope you all have a great beginning to your weekend, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday, September 1st, with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.